Okay. I think this is working. Yeah. Ignored the messy room. It's, well, I mean, been in the process of moving to college. Got to move stuff around. There's like stuff all over my floor at the moment. So, uh, I wanted to tell you all that messages are worth repeating, or rather, that there are messages worth repeating. And I think it's so important to understand that because I think that for a lot of us, we feel this pressure to be original, to be the best, the latest, the newest, and to not share that until we are. To not share our ideas until we are entirely original, until we are entirely something new, until we believe we have something worth sharing. And the thing is, I think we vastly underestimate what is worth sharing. I think we vastly underestimate, or rather overestimate, how much other people know, how much other people understand. And I think a prime example of this is when it comes to learning, to being smart, right? I think a lot of people just don't realize that learning and being smart and how well you do on a lot of tests, things like that, like so much of that is dictated by your environment, even your study habits, even what you know about learning, that is often dictated by who you were given as a teacher, by who taught you how to learn. And that is critical in shaping your understanding of how you learn, right? But we don't often think about that, right? And so I think a lot of people take for granted, either I think a lot of people take for granted when they are really good at studying and they're like, oh, well, there just must be an inherent difference between me and this other person, or like I'm just doing it better, without properly understanding that this difference, this gap, is often due to the fact that those other people just didn't have access to the same resources they had, right? And the same thing goes with messaging. The same thing goes with ideas and concepts, messages, right? Because that's what messages are. They are ideas, concepts, things we share with one another. And once you begin to understand that messages are worth sharing, that messages are worth repeating, that you don't need to be the smartest person in the world, that you don't need to be the person who revolutionizes this concept to explain it to another person, to share it with another person, that is when I think most people find their own ability to learn to share ideas and to teach. It becomes a very, very vital strength. And I think it's so, so important that we have this, because when you don't have this willingness to share your ideas, this willingness to say, hey, I think this is something worth sharing, a lot of the most valuable things in your life, even if they are simple, a lot of the most valuable things you could be sharing with other people, with your community, with your friends, with your family, a lot of those things get lost in translation. There are people I know who, like elderly people who I have talked to for years and years and years, and I know them and I know they know some incredible things, like things that to me would have mattered a lot because I needed to hear those things because I didn't have them. And towards the end of their life, they'll tell me like, oh, I never realized you didn't have this, or, oh, it always seemed like everyone knew this thing to me, or I just assumed that would be the case, right? Because that's what's the case for me. That's my lived reality. And that's why I think it's so important to understand what messages that you understand that are worth sharing. And to talk about sort of, I think a universal kind of example, I think one of those messages is saying, I love you, right? Because when you say I love you to a person, yes, it's something that you have to repeat over and over again, but it means something, right? It means something to you and to that other person you are expressing that love to. And it is worth repeating. It is worth telling someone you love them, because you don't just tell someone you love them and never say it again, right? No, of course not. You tell them all the time, you tell them when you see them, you tell them when you say goodbye. Those messages, those ideas, they are worth repeating. because they are worth listening to. They are worth understanding because they need to be understood. And, to give an example of when I'm teaching, right? Something I always, 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 always try to hammer down when I have new students is that you need to learn how to read. You need to rebuild your understanding of reading because most students nowadays do not read. Most students nowadays do not understand how to read in a deep level. And, that's not by any fault of their own. It's not because they're stupid, right? That's just not the case. It's because they have less resources than I had. It's because they are getting continuously worse education than I had. And that's saying something because education was already kind of going on a downslope when I was in there. So I need people to understand that these things that matter to you, these things that you have studied, that you are knowledgeable of, whether that is history, whether that is, even something simple as like cooking for yourself, right? That's something is like quote unquote simple, right? Even something that might seem as simple as that. Those things are worth repeating. Those things are worth teaching to other people. You should want to teach other people in your life, to share ideas with other people in your life because those ideas matter. Because it is so, so, so important that we learn, that we have places and people we can learn from. Because that is how human knowledge becomes something greater than just an idea. That is how it becomes practice. That's how it becomes something we share with one another. And that is important. That is so, so, so important. Because when you are able to share an idea with someone, you are able to build a bond with them. You are able to connect with them, to build communities with them. And those communities, those shared moments, those are the things that I think truly matter in life. Getting to share moments with people you care about, getting to join with one another, getting to share important things with one another, to connect with one another on a deeper level, to be more than surface level acquaintances. Because look, we can have all these surface level acquaintances. We can have all these people we say, oh yeah, sure, I'll hang out with you. But, do you ever talk with them about anything more than the weather, about anything more than the latest show, than the latest whatever, right? And it doesn't mean you have to say everything all at once, but it does mean that, you should connect with them, that you should be able to connect with people on a deeper level and say, hey, I want more than this. I think a lot of people want more than what we have right now because so much of our lives are disconnected at the moment. We are losing our ability to connect with one another. Kids nowadays don't have the spaces in the city, in the towns, wherever you are, in the community to connect with one another. We are losing those spaces, whether that is to corporations, whether that is to, deforestation, whatever. We are losing those places. And that's something that a lot of people just don't understand, right? Because we don't talk about it, right? We don't talk about those things, bringing it back to that idea of, ideas are worth sharing. Because we don't talk about things, people assume they don't exist. There's this thing called, recency bias, I think. I think I worded that wrong. I think that's the wrong term, but I cannot remember for the life of me at the moment, so we're gonna keep rolling with it. I'll probably add something in, whatever. But we need to understand that, when you don't talk about something and you don't have an example to think of, you're just like, oh, well, it must not exist. Your brain just kind of automatically does that because it's like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. If I don't hear about it, it's probably not a thing, right? And that's not an unreasonable thing always. But you need to understand that there are so many things happening in our lives that we think aren't happening just because we haven't heard about it, right? That's why education is so important. That's why teaching is so important. That's why I think it is so, so important that we have elders in our community who help us remember things, who will bring into the community the sense of remembrance, the sense of, hey, there are things that have happened in this place, in this town, in this community that mattered. And maybe, they're not, maybe like they aren't going to be the same as they are today, but they mattered in the shaping of where we are right now. And if we don't remember them, and we don't remember what we have right now, then we stand to lose it in the future, because when you have no idea of what you had before, then you're going to have no idea that you're losing anything when you do. Right? When you don't know that something is there, then when you lose it, you're going to be like, oh, well, there's nothing there. There was nothing there in the first place, right? You're not going to know that you are losing something. And that is terrifying. That is the worst thing that could happen, because if you have gotten to that point where you don't even know that you're losing things, that means that you are so lacking in information that you don't understand what is going on in the world around you. And that is why we need to share knowledge. We need to share information with one another. We need to repeat messages, because messages are worth repeating. Information is worth repeating. Ideas are worth repeating, because that is how they are shared. You don't need to be revolutionary. You don't need to be some up-and-coming teacher. You don't need to be the most passionate educator ever. Even if it's just you're telling your niece or your nephew, hey, watch out for this place by the creek, because there's, I don't know, like there's an easy way to fall over, because I found out that way because, my friend fell in one time, right? And that's, that's a silly example kind of, but it's something worth sharing, right? Even if it's just you talking to your family members about like, hey, I've been hearing about all these changes in our government. What was it like when you were growing up? Learning from them, right? Even if it didn't seem all that special to them, it matters for you to know. Because you might not know what the past 20 years have looked like because you were in school like I was. Because you were like a kid, So I think it's so important for us to do that, to share messages, because it is necessary for everyone to learn. Because if we don't repeat messages, then we are at risk of people who don't really care about us repeating messages that aren't true, of outdoing us in terms of information economy, so to say. Because when your information, like economy or landscape, is flooded with misinformation, flooded with lies, then what are you going to learn except lies, right? That's the risk of the internet. That's why I always tell people, be careful when you're on the internet, because it is so easy to fall into misinformation if you don't know how to fact check. Because a lot of people don't know how to fact check. A lot of people think, oh, well, the Googling is the fact check. That's just not true. You got to be able to reason through. And that's, in part, it's difficult because we don't have a solid document base, because misinformation is baked into our education system at the moment. And that is scary. So many of our long-standing informational institutions, Smithsonian, Scholastic's not the right word, but like Smithsonian, all these museums, all these school districts, school systems, governments, they're including misinformation deliberately. And that is scary. That is something we need to educate ourselves on. So if you ever find yourself wondering, oh, well, I know this, so why are people, still talking about it, right? Remember that messages are worth repeating. Remember that not everyone has the knowledge you do. And remember that what you have to say can be worth repeating. Thanks.